Now, I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled Stand Out from the Crowd, Strategies for Landing Your Next Role, presented by alumna Caroline Auerkirk. Caroline's a career and confidence coach for young professionals seeking more fulfilling work and lives. Through one-on-one coaching, online courses, and in-person workshops, Caroline is on a mission to help young professionals find new opportunities that maximize their talents while creating space for all of their other priorities. She specializes in moving on from your first job, social impact careers, managing imposter syndrome, discerning whether graduate school is right for you, and so much more. Caroline leverages nearly 15 years of experience as a student, a staff, and an instructor at 3 of our nation's top 10 research universities. Caroline received her AD in history from the University of Chicago, her master's in higher education administration from the University of Pennsylvania. She also has a certificate in creative writing from the Graham School and a certificate from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business Executive Program for Emerging Leaders. She's got a great resume. The list goes on, and so that is certainly enough from me. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Caroline Auerkirk.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm so excited to be here today. Before I dive into the content of today's webinar, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge what you might be feeling as a job searcher during this wild time. Perhaps you're feeling frustrated because you send out dozens of applications and never hear back. Or maybe you're not even finding jobs that match your skills and experience to apply to in the first place. Maybe you're feeling demotivated by seeing how many other people apply to that job on LinkedIn and have decided not to even bother putting your hat in the ring because you worry it'll get lost in a sea of other applicants. Or maybe you're ready to move on from your current job, but haven't started applying yet because you don't know if it's worth it with so many others also on the job hunt right now. If any of those feelings resonate with you, you're in the right place. Regardless of what has brought you to this session today, I want to thank you for spending this hour with me and start with some reassurance that better is possible. By incorporating a few straightforward strategies into your job search, you can set yourself up for dramatically better outcomes. Yes, it takes effort, but the strategies I'm about to share with you build on each other step by step to help you reset your approach, stop wasting time, and finally land a job you love. Now, I know I'm not saying anything revolutionary by telling you that 2020 has been a wild ride for every facet of our world. And the job market is no exception. There has been a seismic shift in the job search process over the last few months. Many people are job hunting, whether it's because they were laid off, or they need more flexibility, or they're just realizing that they never want to go back to that office with those people ever again. There are absolutely still roles out there. 4 of my clients have landed new roles in the past month alone, but pretty much everything about the job process has changed. A world of possibilities has opened up with remote work making geography a moot point for many, but it's precisely because of that increase in possibility that it is so vital to approach the job search with a lot more intentionality and strategy. On that note, let's take a moment to discuss what we'll cover in the session today. As you know, this webinar is entitled Stand Out from the Crowd, and I'm going to share with you a framework for how to approach the job search differently so you can move more efficiently and get better results. We'll talk about 5 strategies that will help set you apart from other folks applying for these same roles, as well as several ways to implement each one. The strategies vary in terms of impact and time commitment, but they're helpful precisely because most people skip over them. I dive into the framework in a lot more detail in my self-paced online course, Social Impact Career Launch. So if you'd like to go deeper after today's webinar, I'd encourage you to visit my website to learn more about that course. To that end, your success with these strategies will depend on whether you choose to actually implement what we discuss here today. So if you're multitasking, I'd encourage you to come back to me and invest the rest of this hour in engaging with the content and strategies we'll discuss. My challenge for you is for you to walk away with 3 action items based on what we cover in this session. Specifically, I'd like you to identify one thing you can do within the next 48 hours, one action you can take within the next 7 days, and one thing you'll do within the next 2 weeks. There's space for you to capture all of these action items in the worksheet for today's webinar, which you can find in the comment section of the webinar platform. And if you happen to be watching this webinar later, once it goes live on YouTube, you can visit my website, carolinehourkirk.com/resources to grab your copy of the workbook. I'm going to share, oh, there's the worksheet. I'm going to share a little bit more about my story and background in just a few minutes when we start talking about the first strategy for standing out from the crowd. But in the meantime, I'll start by saying, like Sam said, that I'm a career and confidence coach for young professionals, roughly 2 to 12 years out of college. I'm based in Baltimore, but I work with clients worldwide, from Singapore to the UK, to the Netherlands, to Canada, to across the United States. My clients are in a range of industries, including tech, archaeology, higher ed, construction, and startups, but nearly all of them have an interest in social impact or sustainability work. I coach clients one-on-one on a variety of topics, such as finding a more fulfilling role, gaining career confidence, and overcoming imposter syndrome, and even applying for graduate school. I also work with some folks in more of an ongoing coaching arrangement where we meet periodically to discuss and process emerging challenges, frustrations, and opportunities at work. For folks who would prefer a more self-paced approach, I also offer 2 online courses: Beat Imposter Syndrome, Strategies for Career Confidence, and Social Impact Career Launch. Registration for both courses is open now, and you can find all the details in the about the courses and the private coaching on my website. So if you haven't downloaded that worksheet, I'd encourage you to do so. Okay, so now that we've discussed some housekeeping, let's jump right into strategy 1. Get clear on what you want. And hints, you need to be more specific than just, I want a job. Let me share a bit more of my background to help give some context to the strategy. I studied urban history at the University of Chicago and graduated in 2009, right in the middle of the last recession. That's me at graduation with my then boyfriend, now husband, and my brother, both also U of C alumni. Were a lot of fun at the dinner table. I had no idea what I wanted to do next, and I felt like there were no jobs anyway, so I did what a lot of my peers did, and I went right into grad school. I got my master's in higher education administration at the University of Pennsylvania with a plan to work at a university, preferably doing something to help students get involved in community service. When I graduated the second time in 2010, the economy was still in shambles, just in time for me to launch my first job search. I applied to everything, seriously. I sent in applications for 83 different jobs at universities and other companies all across the country. I sent in applications for nearly every aspect of higher ed, from residence life to student activities to advising to working at the library. I applied for roles at tech companies and banks, and even the cheese section of my local fancy supermarket. When an organization took the time to get back to me, the answer was almost always no. But most of the time, I just never heard anything. Does that story sound familiar to any of you? Finally, someone from the University of Chicago called and invited me for an interview. I said yes and committed to a date and time and hung up the phone before I realized I didn't even know what role the interview was for, because I'd applied to so many. I had to call them back and ask, which was just as awkward as it sounds. Fast forward a few weeks to me getting the role, which turned out to be a position working with faculty members to organize a new center for urban research at the university. I went to my boyfriend to share the news, and he was, of course, excited for me, but he paused for a moment and said, "Are you sure this is what you want? I thought you wanted to work with students to get them involved in community service." I quickly assured him that everything was going to be fine, that I'd love doing this work, and then I rushed to send that email to accept the role. I'm sure you can see where this story goes. I started the job and realized just a few weeks in that this was not the role for me. I'd spent my entire grad school assistantship working on a faculty outreach program and coming home each night complaining about how all I wanted to do was work with students. And now I was doing the exact same thing, just in a different city. I was doing a good job, right? Growing the organization, managing the budget, organizing conferences, dealing with websites, facilitating connections between different groups of people. I got positive feedback and I learned a ton. But behind the scenes, I had imposter syndrome constantly and felt like I had no idea what I was doing. I spent 4 years in that role until I finally realized that just because I was good at my job didn't mean I had to keep doing it. Now that sounds pretty basic, but having spent my career working with high achievers, I can tell you that it's truly shocking how many of us haven't grasped this concept. So what had happened? Well, as you remember, I'd gotten this job via what I call the spaghetti method, which is throwing out dozens of applications at the wall to see what sticks. I had applied to anything and everything I felt remotely qualified for without any consideration about whether I'd actually enjoy the work. Many of my clients have done this too. Maybe you have as well. And you'll agree that the spaghetti method does not work. Besides being incredibly inefficient and exhausting, the spaghetti method of finding a job is very demotivating. You're getting rejected constantly or living in a state of limbo, and it can feel like you're never going to get anywhere. It also doesn't work because it splits your focus as you try to explain convincingly to one person how you've always dreamed of working in a college residence hall, and then the next day you're trying to convince a different interviewer that the only thing you've ever thought about doing was selling cheese. But most importantly, the spaghetti method doesn't work because it takes your agency away from you. Instead of you controlling your trajectory and career progression, you're putting in the hands of whichever recruiter is the first to like you back. When the jobs you're applying to are all over the place, like I was with applying for roles at universities, in tech, at the supermarket, you're literally waiting for a complete stranger to decide whether you'll be moving forward with your career in industry X, Y, or Z, which could affect your work trajectory, quality of life, and even earning potential for literally the rest of your career. When you look at it that way, doesn't it make sense to invest just a little more time in figuring this out? Okay, so if not the spaghetti method, then what? Enter the career thesis statement. The career thesis statement is a short summary about your ideal job that combines the skills and strengths you're interested in leveraging with specifics about what industry or interest area you'd like to focus on, and a few comments about your workplace preferences that are the most important to you. Here's a formula. Don't worry, this is in the worksheet too. Yes, this is an idealized version. And no, you may not be able to find a job that is 100% a perfect match for your career thesis statement, but I still urge you to do this for a couple of reasons. Here are just a few. One, there may be a job out there that does sit at this intersection. You may not know what it's called. To be perfectly honest, for many of us, our career vocabulary is pretty minimal. Doctor, lawyer, business person, iBanker, consultant, professor, etc. If there wasn't a Barbie doll dressed up like it, you may not even know it's a thing people do. Let's remove the naming problem and describe the work instead. 2, your career thesis statement allows you to make an informed decision. By getting clear on what you want before you start trying to find it, you're not so easily swayed by all of the possibilities. Instead, you can look at a job description and ask yourself, does this match my career thesis statement? If yes, great, apply. If not, either the career thesis statement needs to change or the job opportunity needs to change. And now you can do that with an informed viewpoint to what you're deciding to do. Until we name what it is we want from our careers, we're going to keep being disappointed when you show up for work and it's not what you expected. And chances are that that's because you didn't make the space to acknowledge what it was you wanted in the first place. The third reason why it's so important to make a career thesis statement is that it makes it so much easier for others to help you. We'll come back to this when we get to strategy 4, which is literally all about enlisting advocates. But for now, let's just say it's dramatically easier for someone to send you job opportunities that might be a good match, or connect you with a friend who's hiring, or suggest companies that may be of interest if they know what it is you're even looking for. You're not saying, I'm looking for a new job at a nonprofit, let me know if you hear anything. You're saying, I'm looking for an advocacy and fundraising role at a medium to large nonprofit focused on either women's rights or animal welfare. If you hear anything, please let me know. That triggers a lot more hits in your average person's mental Rolodex. I could spend a lot more time digging into how to craft your career thesis statement, but I want to get to the other strategies that I have to share today. So I'll wrap up by saying that yes, narrowing your focus does feel like you're giving up some of the other possibilities on your radar. However, getting clear on your focus will save you so much time and stress in the long run. And remember, it's not forever. You can always adjust your career thesis statement later. Remember, I focused mine on getting college students involved in community service and social justice work. And I did that for years. And then my thesis statement evolved to wanting to work with young professionals to help them leverage their strengths to find more fulfilling jobs, often in social impact fields. Your career thesis statement doesn't have to be forever. It's just the next step. Clarity comes through action, not endless thought. Okay, on to strategy 2. Strategy 2 for standing out from the crowd is to make your materials outstanding. When I talk about materials, I'm talking about all the written components a potential employer may see. Your resume, your cover letter, your LinkedIn profile, your website or online portfolio if you have one. I could do an entire webinar just on this topic, but in the interest of time, I'm going to focus just on LinkedIn, as this is one area I see that's consistently underutilized and could really help you stand out. I'm going to share with you 10 ways you can stand out from the crowd on LinkedIn. Remember, there's space in the worksheet for this webinar, so make sure you've downloaded that so you can capture anything that resonates with you. Okay, so tip 1, add a cover photo. It can literally be of anything, but don't leave that space blank or at the default. For one, it's boring, and that's a spot where you can capture a bit of your personality. But for 2, taking just a few minutes to source a photo and add it to your profile is such an easy signal to recruiters and potential employers that you're a person who goes beyond the minimum. Are you not going to get a job because you didn't have an awesome cover photo on LinkedIn? No, of course not. But we're talking about how to stand out from the crowd. And the truth is that many people don't take the time to do this. So take 5 minutes, head to unsplash.com, pick an image and knock this out. Tip 2, also on the photo lines, make sure your photo is professional. In today's hyper-digital world, this seems pretty obvious, but yet there are still so many people with blurry or awkwardly cropped photos that it's worth doing a little extra legwork to not be one of those people. Tip 3, update your headline. If your headline or title on LinkedIn matches your current job title, change it, especially if you're job hunting. You have a lot of options here, but a limited number of characters. I'm a big fan of the core identifiers approach. You can see on my profile that I list myself as program builder, career coach, facilitator, people connector. But you could also use the describe what you do approach and use something like communications for social good or catalyzing impact in the nonprofit sector. If you're feeling stuck, think about what 3 words you'd want someone to use if they were talking about you when you weren't around. Like everything we're talking about, this isn't permanent. You can change it again tomorrow. All right, on to tip 4. Get a vanity URL for LinkedIn. You can do this right from the platform, but what I'm talking about is claiming a URL on LinkedIn that's something like linkedin.com/your-name and not linkedin.com/ a whole bunch of numbers. This is free. It takes like 10 seconds. And it's another one of those signaling things that identifies you as someone who is savvy about their career. It also makes it a lot easier to put your LinkedIn profile on your resume, and it makes it easier for the recruiter to confirm that they're looking at the right LinkedIn profile for a candidate. Even if you think you have a really esoteric name, a rare name, do this anyway. I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone's LinkedIn profile or thought I was looking at someone's LinkedIn profile, and it turned out that I was looking at someone else's LinkedIn profile. So tip 5 is to maximize the real estate on your profile. The amount of detail you can put on LinkedIn and the fact that this is a free service is really an amazing opportunity. So make sure you're taking advantage of every aspect of your profile. List all your skills, add in all of your languages, add details to each of your previous jobs, and of course, be sure to add links to your website and publications you've written and anything else you'd love to brag about. If you haven't checked in on LinkedIn in a while, definitely be sure to do this step because they've recently made a bunch of revisions to what kinds of content you're able to showcase. And in particular, they've made it a lot more visible to share a website. So if you have one and it's hiding in your contact info, now is a great time to pull it out front and center. All right, tip 6, invest some time into crafting a killer LinkedIn blurb or summary of who you are and what you care about. This section is keyword searchable, so be sure you're including lots of details about what you're interested in working on. But in any case, it's a great place to capture some of your personality. Consider using some elements of your career thesis statement as inspiration. There's a lot of opportunity to really build out this section. I usually spend an entire hour-long session with my clients focused just on this. So let that give you an indication of how important I think your LinkedIn blurb is. So moving on, number 7, add people. This sounds pretty straightforward, but most folks are pretty passive about adding new connections on LinkedIn. 500 is the magic number you're going for. You don't have to get there by next week, but if you're beginning a job hunt, make it a goal to start adding more people each week. The greater the number of connections you have, the higher your chances you'll actually know someone at an organization you're applying for. But more connections also means that you'll show up higher in search results. So work on hitting 500. You're welcome to add me if you'd like. Okay, moving on. Tip 8 is to follow organizations you're interested in. This is especially important if you're interested in working for a smaller company or a nonprofit, as many organizations will post announcements about job opportunities as a post on their profile page, as opposed to creating a job posting through the LinkedIn job section. So if you're not following the organization, you'll totally miss out on it. Following the organization also allows you to stay up to date on what's going on with them and with the industry in general, which will give you an advantage if and when you're asked to interview. Tip 9 is to join LinkedIn groups. There are zillions of LinkedIn groups out there for pretty much every interest. Join them. I will say one thing that LinkedIn is not great at is letting you know when there's been a new post in one of your groups. You can change this by clicking the little bell at the top of the page for each group you want to receive notifications for. That way, you'll be able to see when new posts go live. And especially for groups where people are sharing lots of job opportunities, this can be a really helpful trick. And I will make a plug for the University of Chicago alumni LinkedIn group because there are like 30,000 people in it and like 5 people commenting. So you should participate because it's just really, really important to begin that dialogue. All right, One final tip for maximizing LinkedIn: you actually have to use it. This means visiting LinkedIn regularly, not just whenever you remember. Reading, commenting on, sharing posts from interesting people, sharing your own posts, checking out those LinkedIn groups. There's so much content on the platform and so many people sharing helpful resources, but it's staggeringly underutilized. You can stand out by actively engaging with the platform instead of avoiding it or feeling overwhelmed like most other job seekers. So there you have it, 10 tips for making the most of your LinkedIn. Take a moment now to jot down anything that resonated with you from this strategy. And remember, I'm challenging you to pick 3 action items you'll commit to from this workshop. Okay, let's move on to strategy 3. Showcase your expertise and stop waiting for permission. Most of my clients are folks who are looking to transition from whatever they're currently doing now into something that's more fulfilling and a better fit for their interests and skills. Usually this means they're transitioning industries. One thing that often comes up is how they will prove to a hiring manager that they have the content background to succeed in whatever they'd like to do next. For example, how someone currently working in higher ed could successfully break into the social impact space. How do you show your interest in a field if you don't have any job experience in that industry? You work with what you've got. You do not need permission to get started. Chances are, if you're interested in moving into a different industry, you're spending at least some of your free time reading up on that industry. What could you do to share some of that work right now? Could you send out a weekly newsletter with links to 5 articles about trends in the industry? If you have a website, could you commit to posting a blog post every week with some brief commentary on something you've read? You could even do that on LinkedIn and share articles and resources that capture your interest, either on your own profile or in one of the LinkedIn groups we just talked about. It does not matter if you have a small audience. It will grow over time. The important thing here is that you're taking matters into your own hands and not waiting until someone else notices you and your interest in this new field. If you start a project like a newsletter or a blog, you can also add that project to your resume, which will in turn add to your credibility during the job hunt. You'll stay in the know on trends in your industry and may even add technical skills like maintaining a newsletter or updating a website to your skill set. This sort of project does not have to cost much in terms of time or resources. You can create a free newsletter for up to 2,000 people on MailChimp this afternoon. The bottom line is that you don't need permission to get started. You can start getting involved in your dream industry today. All right, moving on to strategy number 4, find the advocates. It seems like there's some sort of rule that if you start talking about job hunting, you need to mention how everyone finds their job through networking. It's repeated often because it's true to a certain extent. However, there are a few things that you can do to stand out from the crowd when it comes to networking, and perhaps, just maybe, make networking a little less awkward. In general, most people want to be helpful, or at least not completely useless. The number 1 tip I have for this is to make it easy for others to help you. Figure out what it is you're asking for. And no, you can't just straight up ask someone for a job, or at least I don't recommend that approach. But maybe what you're asking for is a connection to someone else in the industry, or a suggestion for how to approach the job search, or some insight into what it's like to work for a particular company. This is another reason why it's so important to nail down your career thesis statement. That way, when you're having this networking conversation, you can reply with confidence when you're asked what it is you're looking to do. You can say, I'm looking for a role at a consumer packaged good company that will build on my data analysis and problem solving skills and background in financial modeling. You can even add, I'm particularly interested in companies like X and Y, or I'm really focusing my job search on organizations in Chicago. Specificity generates better outcomes. It is so much easier to help that person than it is to help the person who says, I'm looking for a role in Chicago. Because even if I don't know anyone doing data analysis, I might still know someone at a CPG organization, or maybe I have a friend who also recently transitioned from a role in financial modeling, or just maybe I know someone in Chicago. But do your research and make it easy for others to help you. Another tip for this strategy is to create ways to make that networking conversation mutually beneficial. What can you offer in return? Most of the time, networking conversations are very one-sided. Someone with little experience is coming to this wise person with lots of experience and connections, and that can create this imbalance of power in the relationship. If you're reaching out to someone to network with them, think about what you could contribute. Could you send them an interesting article after the conversation? Could you connect them with someone in your network? Perhaps the best example I ever saw of this was from someone who interviewed about 15 people about their careers as professional facilitators and had one question he consistently asked to everyone. He then gathered all of the responses to that one question, paired them with each person's public LinkedIn photo and title, and then put everything together into this really snazzy PDF guide he created in Canva. It was brilliant. He posted it on LinkedIn. Each of the people involved shared it. He got a ton of attention and probably relevant opportunities. I got connected with dozens of people I didn't know before, was recognized as an expert, and everyone involved benefited. It was a really great way to turn the traditional informational interview on its head and spread the knowledge with a much larger audience. You can do something similar. It does not have to be complicated or elaborate to be effective. And that brings us to our last strategy. Strategy number 5, get the right mindset. This strategy might not be as tactical as the other 4, but it may even be the most important one for the job search process and standing out from the crowd. When I talk about mindset, I'm talking about a few different things. The first is that it's absolutely essential that you approach this process from a place of possibility. You have to believe that the job is coming. It does not work if you come from a place of frustration or worry or despair. And I know that is so much easier said than done, especially with the uncertainty of today's world, but it really, really is important. Worry and despair will come through in your cover letters and your interviews, and they will not help you get the job. It is easy to stay positive, or it's not easy to stay positive, but believing that the right job is on its way to you will help. Secondly, I want you to keep track of your successes in this process. It's so easy to see all of the things that aren't working. You didn't get that job, or you bombed that interview question. But it's so much more fruitful to focus on what's working and going well and amplify that. Not only is it more beneficial to your mental health, not to dwell on all the mistakes and missteps, but it's also so much easier to do more of what you're already good at than to spend a ton of energy focused on all of the ways you can improve. The third point I want to make about mindset is that it's really important to release the expectations you might have about this process. Whether it's going to go fast or slow, whether you're over or under qualified, and especially about whether the role you're looking at is the perfect next step for you. Remember, you're looking for a next step, not a permanent position you'll be staying in forever. You can always change your mind or change direction. And just so we're clear, changing your mind does not mean that you're starting over from scratch. All of your previous experiences got you to this point. There is no such thing as starting from zero. You're always drawing on previous knowledge. Which brings me to my last point about mindset. Clarity comes through action. You cannot figure all of this stuff out by sitting around and thinking about it. And I say this as a fervent supporter of the life of the mind. But it's totally true. You're not going to get the job if you don't apply for it. Your career thesis statement will get stronger when you share it with others and actually use it to evaluate job opportunities. You'll get clearer on what you want from your next role by networking and doing informational interviews. You have to have a bias towards action. The path forward might be more zigzaggy than straight ahead, but forward momentum is key. So there we have it. 5 strategies to stand out from the crowd during the job search. Before we wrap up, I want to take a moment to encourage you to imagine how you can implement what we've talked about today. What actions are you going to take to kickstart this job search process and stand out from the crowd? We covered a lot of ground today. We saw how the spaghetti method of applying to jobs does not work and how it can lead to a lot of wasted energy and frustration. We saw how important it is to get clear on what you want and how developing a career thesis statement can help with that. We talked about how putting extra care into your written materials and discussed can really make you stand out from the crowd, and we discussed 10 ways to update your LinkedIn profile to really get that process started. In strategy 3, showcase your experience and stop waiting for permission, we talked about how you can stand out in your target industry by starting a project and sharing your knowledge even before you've landed your next role. We then talked about networking and how to help others help you. We talked about a highly effective strategy for making networking mutually beneficial instead of falling into that knowledge and power imbalance typically involved. And then in the last strategy I shared, we discussed the importance of mindset. We saw how critical it is to approach the job search process from a place of possibility, and talked about tracking successes and releasing expectations about finding the perfect next step. We then wrapped it up by remembering that clarity comes through action, not by thinking your way through the job search process. As I mentioned at the beginning, these strategies are helpful because most people don't take the time to do this. It does not take much extra effort to stand out from the crowd while job searching, but the results are truly extraordinary. I am encouraging you to identify which action steps you plan to take as a result of this webinar and start moving your job search forward today. A few quick reminders before I turn it over to Sam to start the question and answer session. First, if you're interested in a supportive step-by-step approach to navigating the job search process that builds on what we talked about today, I'd highly encourage you to check out my online course, Social Impact Career Launch, where I'll walk you step-by-step through each stage of this process, from getting clarity on what you want in the first place, to building your brand and developing outstanding materials, to finding the job and landing the offer, to making the most of your first 90 days. Also, if you liked this webinar, you may also like the webinar I gave on career confidence and imposter syndrome, which is available from the University of Chicago Alumni Career Program's YouTube page. The workbook from this webinar has all of my contact information, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram and check out additional resources on my website. Lastly, I'd love your feedback. If you found this workshop to be helpful, please, or you have any suggestions, please let me know. There will be a survey at the end of this session, or you can send me an email or a note on LinkedIn. And with that, let's get started on the question and answer session. I can answer most things except for why my cat's in the dishwasher.
And I don't have the answer to that one either, anyone on the line. All right, Caroline, thank you so much. This has been really great. I feel like we've gotten some really actionable tips that can all help us starting today, starting immediately, right? So we do have a lot of questions coming in here.
Okay.
And please feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A function on Zoom. All right, so here's one great question. You mentioned LinkedIn, but you didn't mention Instagram. Or any other social media tools? Is there anything about other social media outside of LinkedIn, Instagram in particular, that might make them effective job search tools? It's really popular, but is it really helpful in the career?
It really is popular, and I spend way more time on Instagram than I would like to admit. I think that's a really great question. So I would say that I think that Instagram in particular has some really great resources for tips. So because it's such a visual platform, there's a lot more like interesting, like there's a lot of people who are sharing like interesting tips on different aspects of the career search. But I haven't necessarily seen lots of people advertising jobs specifically that way. But like most social media, it's a really great way to build connections. So like if you're seeing someone who's doing something interesting and starting to comment on what they're sharing and following them and engaging in a dialogue, then I think Instagram can be useful. Facebook has some Facebook groups which are, I think, helpful for like more support and creating connection, because people seem to be more open and willing to talk with each other on Facebook. But at the end of the day, LinkedIn is the platform for the professional world. And so if you're not there, then you really are missing out. But you could also fall down a rabbit hole and spend all of your time everywhere. And at the end of the day, if you're not applying for the job wherever you're finding it, that's not going to get you anywhere. But I would say you absolutely need to have a LinkedIn profile, and then the other ones are kind of good additions, but they're not going to replace it.
And we have another LinkedIn question, so I'll follow up here. Do you have any tips for standing out when requesting informational interviews from other professionals on LinkedIn? This person says, I have a hard time on LinkedIn because it only gives me 300 characters to make the request. I'm not sure if there's anything else I can be doing in the wording of my request to convince that person on the other side of the computer to let me ask them a few questions about their career.
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm assuming that this person has already tried to find their target person's email address or something like that. But if that's not the case, I would encourage you to do that, because you can obviously send a lot more information in an email than you can in a LinkedIn request. What I would also say is that one is that like, I didn't, that's a really good question. I would say that like, it's just helpful to get the ball rolling, right? You're saying, can I get 20 minutes of your time? And then you're putting the bulk of the conversation into the actual meeting that you have, and not trying to have an entire discussion and answer questions through LinkedIn, like through the messaging system. Like use the messaging system to get, to start the contact, but don't use it as the primary form of communication.
And then here's another great question. If I'm interviewing for a job that I see as a stepping stone to what I really want to do, how do I address that in the interview process? Do I not mention it at all?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't love the stepping stone mentality, because I feel like that makes the job search process feel like more of a game of chess than it actually works out. And I feel like if you're targeting, you know, if you're going into it that way, that you're going to end up being really disappointed when the path doesn't go exactly the way that you're expecting. I think it can be helpful to approach it from the company's perspective too, which is if they're looking at you and saying, you know, they want someone who wants to love them back, right? Like they want you to woo them. And so if you're not sold on them, like maybe that role is better for someone else, right? I get that there are certainly situations where you do need to, like everyone understands that there is a career progression and that you need certain, like there's always, everything is a stepping stone towards something else. But I think in general, it does come through if you're using an organization as a way to get somewhere else.
Here's a question from one of our young alums on the line. Any advice for how to brainstorm for a career thesis statement if you're a more recent grad and perhaps don't have a very clear sense of what you'd like to do next?
I mean, I work with recent grads all the time, and I think that there's a lot of, I think one thing recent grads have going for them is an abundance of possibility. So I would encourage a recent grad to spend time thinking about what captures your interest, right? Start collecting the job descriptions that capture your interest, even if you're not qualified for them, and start looking for the similarities in what you're seeing, right? Are they all drawing on similar skill sets? Are they all drawing on similar industries? Or, you know, like what are the themes, right? They're capturing your attention for some reason. But the other thing about the career thesis statement is that you can write it down and then you can throw it away and you can try another one, right? Like there's, you know, I have some clients who write like 3 and they're very different and they're drawing on very, very different themes. And that's totally fine, right? Sometimes you just need to see them all written out so that you can then make an informed decision about which direction you want to go, right? But at the end of the day, I always like to say, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And you can't do everything all at once. You just need a place to start. And that clarity comes through that bias towards action, right? You have to get, like, life is an experiential learning exercise. You have to get that experience because you don't have any data to work with.
I needed that reminder today. Thank you. Here is another question. How do freelancers fit into the framework that you've outlined for us today?
In terms of finding work, that's a great question. So I recently learned about a concept called the portfolio career, which I think is sort of like the freelancer 2.0, where you've got a couple of different projects that you're working on that are all revenue generating, but none of them is taking up all of your time, which I think is a really interesting approach to that. What I would say about freelancing, effectively owning my own business is a form of freelance work. What I would say about freelancing is that I think it's really, really important to pay attention to what people are coming to you for. So I started my business with one idea in mind, and then I noticed that I seemed to attract customers with a particular, like, completely different perspective and who were asking me different questions. And rather than resisting that, I decided to follow that interest and that lead, because clearly they were seeing something, you know, in me, right? So as a freelancer, I think it can be so helpful to figure out what it is that your niche is, right? And become the go-to person for whatever specific thing you're really focused on, as opposed to trying to be everything for everybody.
Thank you. And here's a great question about learning about a company's board culture, which is really important as you're deciding whether to make the jump there. How can you learn more about the culture at work before you apply? And do you find company reviews by former employees on sites like Glassdoor.com reliable?
Glassdoor drives me bananas because I think, so research is the best form of procrastination. And if you look long enough, you can find literally any answer you want on the internet. And so I think that can be a really destructive path. So what I would say about that is this, which is, when you're putting together your career thesis statement, you're developing your preferences, you're getting this idea of what it is you want, right? I always challenge my clients to say, okay, and how are you going to figure that out, right? Because sometimes there's a clear answer and sometimes you got to guess, right? And some ways to guess include, how did you figure out what the culture was for your current workplace? Or how are you going to be able to assess these kinds of things, right? And getting clear on that before you start looking at a particular company, specifically. I think Glassdoor is just not helpful for that because everybody's experience is different. And especially if you're looking at a really large organization. I worked for the University of Chicago and Johns Hopkins University, both of which have like a jillion employees. And like my experience, I'm sure it was totally different from Sam's experience, or, like someone else in a different department. And so if you're looking at a really big organization, it's just really hard to tell. So a couple of things are, one is making sure that you're getting a good, your focus. I would focus more of my energy on the manager than I would on the company, because people, it's very trite, but people tend to leave managers more than they leave companies. So I would ask questions like, how do decisions get made in this organization? Who does a decision have to go through before it can be approved, right? You know, my answer to that would be very different if I were talking about my University of Chicago experience than it would be if I were talking about my Hopkins experience, right? So asking about how decisions are made and socialized, I think is really important and one way of getting at company culture. But the big takeaway I would say from all of that is just to get clear on what it is you're looking for, because the approach to figuring out company culture is not to say that you'll know it when you see it, because that's going to lead you astray. But like thinking about what you want, like what would it look like before you start finding the answers is going to be helpful.
Thank you. That decision question is a really great suggestion, because company culture is so much more than like the happy hours and that kind of thing. And I feel like when you ask just about culture in an interview, that'll be the thing that people highlight, but there's so much more to it. And that's a great question to get to the crux of it. All right, here is another question from someone who might be facing a difficult decision. How do you decide when to accept an offer that might not be the best fit versus taking a chance, rejecting it, and then continuing to apply?
Ooh, that's a good question. Okay, I just had this, I had this experience with a client, and what we talked about was this idea of figuring out what you're going to optimize for. So are you going to optimize for the, like, so there's, in any given situation, you can optimize for like one variable. I'm not a mathematician, so this is how my understanding of math works. But you're optimizing for one variable, right? So maybe the variable is, I want to be in this particular city, right? So if you're trying to optimize for that, then maybe the first opportunity that's in that particular city is the right one for you. Maybe you're trying to optimize for salary or for better quality of life, and or getting out of a particular situation that you're currently in that's just not working for you. But in any case, kind of taking a step back and thinking about what you're trying to solve for, and then assessing whether this particular solution is the best choice or whether the unknown is better. Because I think that can be really important. But I would also say that there is absolutely no shame in walking away from a job opportunity that's not working for you. Like, just because someone's offering you a job does not mean you need to take it. And I would much rather, both the company and you would much rather see you, if you're feeling it in your bones that it's not the right fit for you, then it's really important to walk away. But I would also just encourage you that, especially if you're leaving a toxic work environment, I always encourage people to think about it as you're going towards this other really cool opportunity, not running away from the toxic environment. So trying to be in that sort of positive direction as opposed to the avoidance kind of direction.
It's a great way to think about it. Here's a question from someone who says that they feel that they're overqualified for the position that they're interviewing for. They're joining the company with a desire to move up. How do you subtly ask about that career development and career growth in the interview process?
I think that's a good question. I would say this, which is that, I mean, the company is still interviewing you for this role, right? So maybe there's a mismatch between how you're perceiving the role as it's written and how the company is perceiving your expertise or experience. So making sure that you're clear on that communication piece is going to be really important so that you're aligned. But I would also, I mean, I think you can really, point blank ask the question of, how does evaluation work in this place? Are there regular steps for promotion? Are there, what are the criteria for success, and how frequently will we be evaluated on those? Because it's different at every company. And I would also, if possible, fact check that between the manager who you're talking to and someone who might be more of a peer, because you might get different answers. And if you're getting different answers from different folks, then that's, I think, a red flag to watch out for. But my first step would be to make sure that you're aligned because they still interviewed you for the job, and make sure that you're on the same page regarding how you're presenting your experience and what the responsibilities of the role are.
That's great advice. Here is another question. We actually have a few questions about LinkedIn, so we'll do LinkedIn lightning round. One, is it worth it for a recent grad to fill out their LinkedIn profile with different class projects and the classes that they've taken most recently?
I would focus on the ones that you would be interested in doing again. Okay, so if you're, share something that you're proud of or would want to talk about in an interview, or a project that you worked really, really hard on that could have transferable skills to the industry that you're interested in. But don't just add random projects for the sake of adding random projects, especially if it's something that you were good at, that you did well, but you don't enjoy doing. Don't put things on your resume. Well, sometimes you have to put things on your resume that you don't enjoy doing, but I really want to make that distinction between stuff you're good at and like to do, stuff you're good at and don't like to do. Because if you're trying to get out of the business of doing stuff you're good at but don't like to do, then it might be helpful to stop talking about all those things that you're good at and don't like to do.
Great advice. We'll do probably 2 more questions here and then we'll close out. You mentioned having a lot of connections on LinkedIn will help in your search profile. Do you recommend making LinkedIn connections just to network, or do you think that it's important to have a meaningful relationship with them in order to connect?
I mean, I have 2 cats and I can barely remember both of their names. So I don't necessarily think it's realistic to have a meaningful connection with 500, 700 people on LinkedIn. But I would say that it can be helpful to at least indicate why you're reaching out to someone, and indicate, what it is about them that seemed appealing to you. I mean, it's, whether that actually comes to fruition in some sort of really like fruitful experience and you have a meaningful relationship. I mean, I would love to read the romance story where people met in the LinkedIn comments, but I don't think that's necessary. But don't just like randomly cold email or cold message people. Like, it's nice. Everyone wants to feel flattered, right? So including a note about why you're reaching out to them or what sparked your interest can be super helpful.
And here's a great question that piggybacks off of our culture discussion that we were having. As a woman who's interviewing for tech jobs, is there a way to ask in interviews how many other women work there? I've had an experience where I was the only woman on my team. It was toxic, and I don't want to have that happen again. And I think this question could apply to a lot of different backgrounds and diverse workers.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Well, what I would say to that is, if you're only meeting one person on the team, I would push back before you get too much further in that process, right? So trying to change the interview process or advocate on your behalf on the interview process to meet more people on the team so that you're not just having one particular entry point to the organization. So that's kind of where I would start with that question of asking just about the composition of the team, but also meeting with other folks on the team. I had an interview once for a job, and they were going to fly me out and just have me meet with the director and the executive director and not meet anyone else on the team. And I pushed back on that, and I said, well, I want to meet the students. I want to meet other folks as well. And I'm really glad that I did that, because otherwise I wouldn't have gotten some really valuable information. So I would just push back if you're only talking to one person.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to everyone for participating who joined us on the line today. And a special thank you to you, Caroline, for giving us great tips on this really important topic.
No problem. Thank you.